Bienvenidos to the Paseo podcast. I am your host, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon, and today we are talking to Puerto Rican author Xochitl Gonzalez. She has a new book out because we're recording this before the book comes out, but when you're listening to this, the book will be out, of course. But she has a new book called Olga Dies Dreaming. The book follows Olga and Prieto, a pair of successful New York siblings with Puerto Rican roots, as they navigate a tense reunion with their estranged mother, Blanca, in the days leading up to the devastation of Hurricane Maria. I'm actually reading it right now, but what you should know is that it has gotten some really good positive reviews. Time magazine just published their list of the 21 most anticipated books of 2022. And what's the first book at the top? Olga Dies Dreaming. So again, by the time you listen or watch this episode, you'll be able to find it on a bookstore shelf, a local bookstore shelf near you. But anyway, all that said, Xochitl Gonzalez, welcome to the Paseo podcast. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much, Joshua, for having me. And I'm just so excited to talk about this book from this specific perspective. So this is a lot of fun for me.
Great. No, I'm super excited to have you on. Can you first tell us a little bit about yourself and tell us, what's the premise of Olga Dies Dreaming? What should we know?
Yeah. So I'm a 44-year-old writer who lives in Brooklyn, and I actually grew up here my whole life, and I was raised by I'm actually Boricua and Mexicana, but I was raised by my mom's family. I was raised by my maternal grandparents, and in and around Sunset Park, Borough Park, Brooklyn. And that's definitely a big inspiration for this book. And I came to writing very late in life. I didn't start writing until I was 40. And so prior to that, I had my eponymous, my eponymous protagonist been a wedding planner, which is her career when we meet her. And I owned a business for a number of years, did consulting. I worked as a fundraiser. And then when I turned 40, I just was like, I really want to follow this passion that I've always sort of had. I loved books. I loved reading and I'd always loved writing. I never gave myself the space for it. And so I ended up actually blowing up my entire life and applying to graduate school. And I got into the Iowa Writers Workshop, and I left a lifelong Brooklynite, moved to the Iowa City, Iowa to get my MFA.
Sounds exciting.
It was like reverse exciting.
Yeah.
It was like, it was exciting in a very cerebral kind of way. But I'd had the idea for this book I had the idea the same day that I got into my MFA program. And so I spent the months leading up to moving there. So from February of 2019 until August, just furiously writing this book as fast as I could, on weekends and mornings before work. And then I got to Iowa, and there really wasn't anything else to do. So I just was like with my imaginary friends in Brooklyn. And so kind of what is the book about? It's really, honestly, the inspiration going into it was I wanted to write a really compelling story that drew people in, that made my own people and community feel recognized, but that also made people give a shit about the fact that we have a colony. And I originally my intention was I wanted to write about, I just had felt that I'd had this experience of kind of growing up in Brooklyn, very blue collar family. Like my grandmother was a lunch lady. My grandfather was a janitor at the school in Sunset Park. And then I ended up getting thrust into an Ivy League college, and in the mid 90s. And it was literally one of the most traumatizing things of my entire life that rendered me and many other people that I knew there, Latino people that I knew there, very confused. It's like you sort of come out and you're like, I don't know what is success now? What is it? What am I supposed to be doing? What is ambition? And I just had not seen characters that kind of reflected that trajectory, and that sort of searching for how do we reconcile the values with which we were raised with the kind of culture of elite American success in a capitalistic society. So at its most theoretical level. And so I started thinking about my own kind of biography, which is that my parents met in the Brown Power movement. They actually are very involved in the Socialist Worker Party. My mom was, fought for Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department at CUNY, and literally was one of the first employees at the Brooklyn College Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department. And then they were both still very active in politics, and so I was left to be raised by my mom's parents. And I was like, they'd send me like marks for beginners, like an illustrated book. Like, like I was like, I was very much like raised with that. And then I somehow found myself as an adult working pretty successfully as like a luxury wedding planner to the ultra wealthy of Manhattan. And I just sometimes would wake up and be like, how do we get here? And when push came to shove, I sort of thought about, I was like, I want this female protagonist. I want her to sort of have come through this trajectory because I want people to see that that's a real person. That's a real like human experience. And I was, what if you've never gone to therapy? And this became the starting point from which I was like, what would 10 years of really bad coping mechanisms and I think my family, I think there's a lot of Latino families like this, a lot of Boricua families like this, where we don't always talk about our problems. Like, it's very like, it's like, just keep going, pa'lante, and don't worry about it. And let's not call attention to our dirty laundry. And it's like, we're really, just buck up and move on. And yet there's a lot of families with trauma. And so I had to deal with my own traumas that I'd never dealt with. And I started therapy when I was 30, and I started writing this book when I was like 41. And I was like, what if you'd not had 11 years of therapy? And I just kind of kept some biographical structure there because I was familiar with what coping mechanism that could result in, and then sort of wanted to look at that. And then I gave her a brother because I was an only child. And I'm also fascinated just generally, and I haven't done a good job of synopsising this book, but
go for it. I love it.
So we meet Olga, and she's 40, and she's a wedding planner, and she was left by her mother when she was 13, and her father was also a young lord. Her parents met in the Young Lords Party, and by the time the 90s come, he has sort of relapsed into an addiction that he had as a younger man, and eventually dies of HIV. It takes the sort of her youth puts her in the early 90s, when these things are happening to her. And I gave her an older brother because I also I wanted her to not go through the experience alone. And I also was intrigued by how we have different relationships to our parents and our culture with just a few extra years. And so when her mother leaves them when she's 13 and he's 16, almost 17, and how this sort of informs the way that they each grow up and their relationship with each other and their relationship to their community and their identity, and also their thoughts about their own mother and father. And so he grows up to be a congressman that represents what would be Nydia Velasquez's district. Nydia's district. Oh my gosh. And,
yeah. I hope you send Nydia a copy of this.
I know, I need to actually. Yeah. And then a reporter for the Washington Post just didn't know I followed her and was like, this is giving me cringes. It's so accurate to DC. Like, it was like, but I made him a congressman, and he is a person that's very compromised. Like, on the surface, he has the best intentions, and in his heart, he has the best intentions, but he was never given the space to fully be himself and deal with a lot of like this baggage that he has. And he was raised to be a caretaker for the family and to be the strong kind of man of the house, even at such a young age. And his sister is honestly a little bit of a mess. Like, she's very successful on paper. She's like, we meet her, she's having an affair with the father of one of her old clients. She's like stealing from her clients. It's like this weird way of like morally correcting things. And what we come to find out is that though their mother has been absent for 27 years when we start the book, she's communicated with them one-sidedly through letters all of these years, where she has like her friends that kind of keep an eye out on them and keep her posted on what they're doing. And she sort of looms large with mothering from a deep, deep distance. But Blanca left because she had, after the Young Lord, she sort of was bored with domestic life and wanted to do something that she felt was more important in the world. And that was very much taken from my own experience with my parents. And what we come to find out is she's become much more radicalized. And eventually we discover that she's actually returned to Puerto Rico. And that is where we meet her. And it takes place in the months before and after Hurricane Maria. And I just, I wanted to create compelling characters because I think it's so easy right now and there's a love story in there, and there's a lot of great family stuff and strength of character. But really, I wanted to sort of create a piece of art that illustrates the fact that these are not abstract news stories. Like, these are things that are happening, that gentrification in Brooklyn, obviously disaster capitalism on the islands, like gentrification on the island, like these are things that are really promesa, like these are things that are actually impacting people's lives and families. And so it was very, I don't know, it was very important to me. And I felt a real urgency about it. It's really also a love letter to Brooklyn, because one of the things that, and I don't know how it is going in Chicago, and you can tell me, but like one of the things that's happening in New York that's sort of heartbreaking to see is that there was a whole community and sort of New York culture. It's like it's its own thing that was such a strong arm of the diaspora that gentrification has just decimated, because people have been pushed out of these enclaves that had been like these New Rican enclaves, like Sunset Park used to be. We're seeing it happen. I'm a board member of the Lower East Side Girls Club. We're seeing it happen on the Lower East Side. Like it's already happened in it's happening so rapidly in East Harlem. Like, and so, like what does that do when there's a second diasporic wave caused by economic like greed, And so it sort of touches on a lot of that stuff, but at the same time can sometimes be pretty funny. So, and really it's a story about family, about love of all kinds, like family love, romantic love, self-love, I think most of all, and love of culture and love of place.
Well, I definitely want to talk to you more about, how you play around with this backdrop of gentrification, the class dynamics. I do want to delve a bit deeper there, but to go back a little bit to kind of give you some context on what we experience here in Chicago, very similar to what New York has experienced. So it's interesting to see how you touch on it in this piece, because talk about, New York being the mecca of the Puerto Rican diaspora. Even though Florida may be giving y'all a run for your money,
I think so. Yeah,
Brooklyn is like the mecca for gentrification. I mean, it has been for a while now.
It's actually painful. It's like painful having grown up here, and just what it means to me and to my friends that I grew up with. It's like people don't even know that is what it was, because it's not even like it's being inhabited or co-opted, I should say, by people that weren't even a part of that culture, of hip hop culture. Like it's like it just literally is completely over their heads. And I don't know. I think, it's funny, like to talk about identity, like, in the book, Prieto is very comfortable in his in his Puerto Ricanness, like in his identity. He he very much, that's part of his like persona as a politician. This is very much who he is. And his sister, she's at one point, her mother tells her, you're light skinned and you talk in a way that doesn't upset white people, like white people's ears. And, and she gets sent, to, or she chooses to send herself to, she goes to a fancy New England college, which in the adaptation, I just call it Brown. But in the book, I was like, let me let it be any place. And it's really a funny Rorschach test, because people are like, is this Dartmouth? Is this blah, blah, blah? Like, whatever school they went to, they think that's the school. But, I think, and that almost makes her more confused than ever about who she is in some funny way. And what a lot of her plight is, the one thing that she feels completely deniably is part of Brooklyn, except that it's like almost like the ground is being swept out from under her. So it's like she feels fully one identity that is starting to cease to exist. And I think that sense of like extinction is like personal, is truly painful for her. And it's something that ironically ends up being the connecting point between her and her romantic interest, her real romantic interest in this, that sort of opens up a lot of other thought processes for her. So I think what was good is that you can read a million news articles about this place going, like, oh, they're knocking down these homes. You can read about Los Sures now being all luxury condos. Like, you can read all that, but like, what's beautiful about the novel as a form is that it gives you the space to like explore explain the personal pain of like seeing, businesses go under. And I think of seeing opportunities, which is almost more painful, sometimes seeing opportunities that were denied a community suddenly come to white people that have the money. And, there's this point where they had, they wouldn't allow bars, like her neighborhood wasn't zoned for bars, and then all of a sudden it opens up, like they make a change. And she's like, but why aren't any, and it's, in real life, it's a very Latino and Asian American, it's like, why, it's actually China, it's one of the largest Chinatowns in New York, other than Chinatown in Manhattan. But like, she's like, why aren't there any Chinese people opening bars? Why aren't there any Puerto Ricans opening bars? Why, like, it's like
asking the right questions.
No, and we're seeing, we're seeing it now with weed legalization. Like, it's like, it's like, yes, we want to give an advantage to Black and Latino communities, except that the barrier to entry from a cost perspective is like outrageous. So it's like things change, the same things that sort of tied us up change. And then we can't, there's new, they say they open a door, then there's a new obstacle, a new hoop to jump over. And I think, or to jump through. And I don't know, I think I wanted to create a character that could verbalize those thoughts that people don't really want to, well, I don't want to say people don't want to hear. It's that I'm not talking about gentrification with somebody who just moved here. You know what I mean? Like, it's like I'm not interested in explaining to you what you did. Although I did have one person on a podcast ask me, how can you be a good person that moves to a new place that's gentrifying? And I thought and I was like, well, no, people, because what we're losing is this idea that I think is culturally like part of us, this idea of talking to your neighbors, of knowing the neighborhood, of knowing, of knowing one another, and we sometimes just to gossip, and sometimes, but to take care of each other. And I think, this wanting to take care of each other, I do feel is something that culturally is a part, that is something that is handed down from one generation to the next. And I think it's being replaced with people that want to be strangers. They want to live in high rises and not know their neighbors and not talk to anybody when they go and get coffee. And I just think, I think I wanted to just sort of get into the inner space of what that experience is like, to feel yourself pushed out,
No, I agree. And I think, when we talk about gentrification, those questions are always tough. I think it's absolutely layered. You want to, at one end, absolutely, it's that community aspect. It's getting invested in the community, getting active so that you're looking out for the many and not just your own self. It's policy that affects who dictates what the value of property is worth in a given neighborhood. Like, why is a place like Lincoln Park, why is property valued so high there? And a community like I live in, Hermosa, isn't. So when you think about the ripple effects of that, small example. We could talk about a whole episode on gentrification, but
I know. I'm like, what?
Yeah, I know. It's like we could really go off the rails here. In a good way, but but you look at the ripple effects of even something like property. If you have a working class Latino household, and one of the only ways you can pass on wealth is through your property. Well, if someone can just say, well, your neighborhood isn't worth squat now, and that drops your property value, you might end up being underwater. You might end up not really having much to give to your children. And then on the flip side, oh yeah, Lincoln Park, your property is worth $1 million. Talk about keeping wealth inside one type of demographic. Gentrification is a way to, but that's just one ripple effect.
But I think what happens though also is that, and what I really wanted to bake it into the cake of these characters is that, and this is something, sometimes I pull things from my life and I didn't even realize I pulled them from my life. Like my grandparents bought the house that I lived in. It was a 3-family house with my grandmother's sisters. Okay. And so it was only family that inhabited this house. You know what I mean? Like, and everybody in my family lived in a house like that, but they were able to buy a house at a time where people with very blue collar jobs could save and buy a house. But at the same time, when they were retiring and somebody came and offered them a windfall, like, you're working class people now ready to retire. It's very hard to say no when somebody comes and is like, oh, like now you can get old and some with relatively worry free. Like, and I think that that's what has happened. It's not that in some cases, there are neighborhoods like Sunset Park. There were eventually a large number of Puerto Rican homeowners and Latino homeowners, but a lot of people, it's like the economy, the nature of New York just changed. And it's like, well, then what do I do? Like, and so you saw a lot of people sell because it was their one chance to get the home ownership was something, but it wasn't the same level of security because it's not the kind of jobs as the cost of just living. I think at one point, it's so funny, by the way, I laughed so hard about this. I was like, there's a point where he runs into a woman that lives in the neighborhood and she's complaining about a mango being $3.
Yes.
And then I read my friend's book, which is coming out. My friend Clevis Natero, who's a Dominican writer, and she wrote a book about a different take on gentrification. And in her book, somebody complains about a $3 mango. And I was like, mangoes must really be $3 because how do we both come up with this?
Well, no, hey, you're onto something there. And we've had conversations like this with previous guests talking about the racism of produce, how we can grow up eating aguacates and pana and, and a lot of this produce that is native to our cuisine. And yet, it can be valued at such a low amount when it's not on the radar of the most affluent, I will say 100%. Our white brothers and sisters, anybody that may be watching or listening to this, y'all are the reason that avocados cost so much now.
Avocados, I know.
Somebody likes it on some toast and then just gets to dictate an arbitrary cost for that. Next thing you know, something that has been in our cuisine for generations is now affecting our ability to eat healthily.
It's so true. And so, I don't know, food, we were chatting a little bit before we started recording. Mm-hmm. I think food politics is so interesting because I'm seeing on La Isla, like so many people that are going vegetarian because it's a way of sort of like protesting in some ways the Jones Act and the difficulty getting produce and supporting local farming.
Talk a little bit about how you explore class dynamics. Now you talked about Olga, having success, Prieto, her brother having success, and then the looking at where they are in their life versus where their mother is in their life. I mean, those. And not saying those are the only class dynamics you explore, but those are pretty big contrasts.
Yeah, well, so I think
how do you do
both
that?
of their occupations, their occupations were really good and important to me. Like originally I didn't really want to make her a wedding planner because I wanted to just do something else. But I know that people find that kind of interesting, and B, when I started thinking about it, I was like, what a great. Because I also often thought about class. What a great way to talk about class, because you are, on the one hand, it's a weird profession because you have to be both like aesthetically pleasing and have good taste, quote unquote, good taste. And you also have to be able to sell yourself to people that are well educated and have lots and lots of disposable income. And yet at the same time, at the end of the day, you still service them. Right? Like you're still in the service industry, and it's just at a very high level, but you are not really there as a peer. And I think I really wanted to be able to show, I don't know, I see it now, like I'm seeing it even with COVID. Like my friends of more middle income means that more middle income and lower and working class means, somebody has COVID. Well, I guess we're all going to get COVID. Like, it's like this, literally, like it was like, well, I guess I'm going to get COVID now. Like, and then I have friends and old work colleagues that have tons of money. And it's like, oh, well, I'm just going to go and isolate at our country house. I say that to say that, like, but there's this panic. It's not even like, it's like in the prior to that, it's like, oh my God, what if I get COVID? And it's like, I think that it's an interesting thing to just see the approach that people take. Like, it's like, well, I guess if one of us gets COVID, we're all going to get COVID. Whereas it's like, I can't possibly get COVID. And even though you actually probably have the easiest way to do it, like, it's so I think like I wanted to give up like some space to talk about how it's not just about purchasing power or about like privilege. Like I think at one point her assistant is somebody like Olga's assistant is somebody that she's forced to hire by an old client. Right. And so she's really a good assistant, but Olga resents it because she's like, oh my God, like I have to, like I'm annoyed that you're here because she basically threatened to take all of her job, like my work away. Like, so, you know, I think that there's tiny power dynamics that exist beyond just having the ability to spend a lot of money on a wedding. And then with Prieto, I think even though he is not a person that's driven by capitalism, like he's very much a public servant. And in that sense, he's a pure public servant. The power that donors and capitalism have over him, I think is important. And so I felt like those were two ways in which I would be able to very organically talk about and show not only class dynamics, but also the thought processes and privileges that come with those dynamics. You know, and and sometimes I have a lot of fun with it, like maybe too much fun with it. Like she goes to like a high-end Mexican restaurant owned by like a white guy who'd gone to like all these private schools, and like he like was like tripping and like had
you transported me to so many experiences. You know how many times I've walked into like a Mexican restaurant or just to like Latin American, Central American, Caribbean, and I'm like, I wonder who the owners are.
Exactly.
I just wonder. This place just gives me a vibe. Anyway, sorry, I was just an aside, but very relatable part of the book.
And I just think like what I tried to do was show where power lies. And I wanted to create two characters that had agency. You know, like, I mean, they're both good at what they do. And I think it's like, but even within the context of that, it's important to see where they sit in the larger scheme of power, you know. And I had when I was workshopping it, you know, the book alternates POVs. So we hear from Olga's mom in her letters, and then we hear from Olga, and we hear from Prieto, and then we also hear from Olga has this white lover when we first meet, and they eventually break up, but we keep hearing from him. And when I was workshopping it, you know, I mean, if we really wanted to drill into it, like honestly, like every character sort of has a corollary in terms of political belief and where they sit in the larger relationship of Puerto Rico and the United States. But I remember when I was workshopping it and people were like, I don't understand why the white guy needs a point of view. And I was like, because Puerto Rico right now can't exist without the white guy's point of view. And so we therefore need to hear it. Like, whether we find it relevant or not, it inserts itself. And there's a casual power that he has, that he exerts in the course of the novel that, you know, is intentionally meant to mirror the sort of laissez-faire, like nonchalance with which the United States exerts power over Puerto Rico. So I think, I try to think about it on a symbolic level as well. I mean, a lot of people will be like, it was a really fun love story. Sure. Story. But I think that for the reader that's interested in diving in and into the politics of it, I did very much think about those underpinnings quite a bit. And and it was, you know, it's funny, at some point we'll get to your question about what does being Puerto Rican mean. I will actually say, while it was so important to me to write this book, and I'm sure I'm going to have like 17 emails from like people that are like, why didn't you write more than 17? When are you going to write about a book about Mexicans? Like, and I'm like, and maybe, and at some point I will, but I think like,
it'll come.
I know. Oh my God, you know, like absolutely 100%. And I already had somebody like in a very sweet way, but they're like, what's a girl with this Aztec name writing about Boricuas? Like, and I was like, it's a, you know, like, and
I thought the same thing too. And when I saw it originally, I was like, what's the, I see an X there. It doesn't look Puerto Rican. But then to think that someone's going to be like, what is a name? Number one. Number two, you're Mexican and Puerto Rican. And that's beautiful. That's beautiful.
I had an older Boricua writer tell me that I should change the character and have her also be half Mexican and half Boricua. And I was like, no, I don't want to do that, because I just wanted it to be, I knew what I wanted this family to be. Now,
right.
And I see
that's not a biography of your life.
It's not a biography.
You know? Right.
No, it's not a biography. It's fiction. It's fiction.
Right.
I think the other part about it is that, like, though I always knew this was going to be what the book was about, like, because the idea came out decently whole. Like, I was like, you know, I'm always sort of surprised that the germ of what it is pretty close to what it ended up being. That said, my complete idea of what that means to me, what my identity means to me, changed and was so enriched in the process of writing the book. And I don't know. It's so fascinating. Like I've been fascinated by that, because I wanted things to be pretty accurate. So I did a lot of research, and the amount of, I don't even want to just say pride, but the amount of like consistency of character of our people throughout generations that I then started to see, and really like immersing myself in history that we were never fucking taught. Never taught. Like,
yep. I maybe had 2 pages in a textbook in school.
Never taught. I'm like horrified when I think, like, it's like horrified. And I think I was so hurt and saddened when this started to kind of come together for me, because I was like, how many people were told, you know, and in the very beginning of the book, she talks about the very beginning, like she talks about her Tio Jojo being dyslexic and how they didn't discover it until he was a grandfather, and one of his grandchildren was, you know, that, and I was like, and that was very much from like stories that my family, we were like, oh, you know, very nonchalant. It's like, oh, you know, they put me in special ed. And it was like, what? Like, it's like, you know, what's like, and I, the idea that we were told and dismissed and then not told about all of our strength, and not like, and that we were like literally being pillaged culturally and like shoved to the margins, and never not knowing our own strength and history, like, is just it is a way in which people, it's a psychological warfare in some weird way. Like it's like a way that you diminish people's self-esteem. And I remember going to the African American History Museum at the Smithsonian in DC, and like walking out enraged because I was like, we were literally miseducated to believe a myth. And and I think that I came into the process of conceiving this book and then beginning to write it.
You mentioned having Olga's boyfriend as a white man, his point of view, because I mean, the island kind of goes, unfortunately, as the white man goes. I mean, the promesa, colonialization, and I think there's a lot of white people, especially white liberals, that will push for something like Puerto Rico statehood without understanding the layered history, the context that comes with that type of statement. Because to them, it's a natural flow of things. But to many Puerto Ricans, it's like, okay, so we're asking the, in our minds, the oppressor to give us permission to live. And when in the first place, we were already getting rid of one repressor that was giving us in the Spanish, that were giving us our pathway to our own independence, and under the guise of quote unquote saving a group of people, the United States swept in and claimed Puerto Rico for its own. So we're looking at the now present day world largest colony. Puerto Rico's had to deal with naval tests on Vieques and Culebra, eugenics, like you mentioned before, the sterilization of our women, the Jones Act, even La Ley de la Mordaza, where our bandera was illegal, to present day being the financial crisis, Promesa, Hurricane Maria, all types of climate challenges. And it's easy to look back as somebody, I would hope, as somebody that might have been pro-statehood, pro-commonwealth, to think, maybe I should readjust or reconfigure how I look at something that like Puerto Rico status and what that relationship looks like between the island and the U.S. Because with the way things are going now, what supporting points does someone that's pro-commonwealth or pro-statehood really have? Because I don't know what the future of the island is when you look at things like exports and imports, when you have our entire industries like sugarcane, coffee that was drank in the Vatican by the Queen of England. Those industries, now that we're seeing a little bit of resurgence on the island, to your point of people using that as a form of protest and investing internally. But the island has been stripped for parts, and it continues to be stripped for parts in the way we have laws that are basically attracting the rich and wealthy from the United States to avoid paying taxes in exchange for not really hiring and investing in the Puerto Rican community.
Exactly right.
So all this to say, the
we're
list goes on.
Paradise.
And
we're gifting paradise.
Gifting away paradise. So, and I truly dread Xochitl, the day when I look at Puerto Rico and the majority of people living there are not Puerto Rican, where the Puerto Ricans become the minority in Puerto Rico, which is mind-boggling to think, but the way we're trending, it can be a very real reality.
I mean, I can't wait for you to finish the book because it gets into all of that. And I think what we have to call it is what it is, which is it's basically it's a very hands-off version of genocide, because it's truly like, I mean, it's starving the people of their home, and smoking them out, in a way. And I think that is what we saw. I mean, I probably, it's weird. It's not a cynical book overall, but certainly the take of what has been happening post Maria is very cynical. But I think accurate, sadly, like where it is not, I don't believe it's just coincidental, like convergence of incidents. Like, I think it is very systemic. And I think that, the goal is to make this a paradise for the wealthy. And unfortunately, given the way that our political system works, the same people that are migrating to the island are the same people who are major donors to all of these, like, it's like it's not, unfortunately, like having nothing to do with one another. It actually all converges. And I get into all of that with the book. It's very, character driven, but I get into it. And I think, it's interesting. You go on, if you look at some of these, when I was working on the TV adaptation, it was funny. It like opened up a whole other layer of stuff.
We should mention though, Xochitl, we didn't say this explicitly, but you referenced the adaptation. HULU is very interested in the novel.
So we delivered the pilot, and we're waiting now, like light the velas, because it's going to be beautiful. But we're waiting for the order, hopefully an order for us to go to series, and we shoot 7 more episodes for this season. And their dream is for it to be a multi-season show that would go, there's a time jump in the book at the very end that goes about 8 years. So the first season would cover most of the book, and then it would time jump. But when we were shooting the pilot and working on the pilot, and we actually then had actors playing characters, and I was saying Chicago's own Melissa Dupree is in this, and and she plays Sarito, who's barely a character on the page in the book, but then is like a very big character in the show, which is sort of fun. But I say all this to say that Ramon Rodriguez, who plays Prieto, and I were like, he's like, we need to beef up his real feelings about statehood, because like it's sort of, you get to do it in passing. And so he and I both went on this like research mission of like, what are these pro-statehood like arguments? And one of them is like absolutely hilarious. Like, it's like, we couldn't have our own Miss Universe contestant. Like, because that's what everybody cares about. It's like,
oh my gosh. That is so true. There are definitely people out there that making that argument.
It's really like really crazy arguments. But anyway, I just like, I think it's, I think that we, I don't know. And the problem with what's happening also on the island is that this system that we have, these plebiscites, like, are so corrupt. And as the island becomes more and more non-Boricua, suddenly they get more and more validated. I don't know. Like, so we're at a critical point. But I also think, if you think about it, I don't know. I'd love to think that that the summer of George Floyd protests would have happened on their own. But I also think people were astounded and amazed by the summer of 2019 in Puerto Rico. Amazed. Yes. And it was on the front page of every major newspaper. And the idea that people could be that disgusted and that fed up, and I do believe that inspired the mainland United States beyond an issue about Puerto Rico. Like, we can't sit still, and that we have voices. And so I really, I think that was an important moment I think that was a moment where Puerto Rico led for America. Honestly, like, in terms of like, what do you feel? Because I remember seeing it. It wasn't like the mainland wasn't fucked up at the time, and being like, what are we doing? Like, what are we doing? I was like, what is every atrocity that you can imagine going on right now? And like, what are we doing? Like, and so I really think that was, I think that we are at an intriguing point.
I'd agree with that. And you mentioned the 2019 protest to oust then Governor Ricardo Rosselló. When we've done episodes on that, but I tell you, we recently actually did an interview. One of our guests was Gwen Aviles, who's a senior reporter for Insider, and another researcher. He's a student at MIT, Francisco Proskauer. And we were talking about the conversations they've had with young Puerto Ricans and analyzing some of the public data, which there is not nearly enough of to analyze how Puerto Ricans view Puerto Rico status, affiliation to political parties. So we kind of tried to take as deep of a dive as we could there. And one of the things that were pointed to were a lot of the things that we've discussed already. It's a bubbling point. And you look at something like 2019, talk about a masterclass in democracy. You got 3 million Boricuas on an island, and you have a third of them that could, and that's just the people that could make it to the capital.
That's just the people that could make it. That's right.
And then you have throughout the diaspora protest, we had a London Rican on the show talking about how, hey, we don't even have a spot to eat Puerto Rican food here, but we found enough of us to protest, and they did. And you can, and anybody listening, you can look this up, listen to the episode. But it really inspired a lot of people. And Gwen actually had written an article that talked about her discussions with young Puerto Ricans, pointing to the financial crisis, Hurricane Maria as being those key points. Now, I'm not saying that hit the switch for everybody, but hit the switch for enough people to add to the ranks of people calling for a readjustment and a realignment and how we view that relationship between the U.S. and Puerto Rico. And I think that's trending in the right direction.
I think it is trending in the right direction.
Been so passive for so long.
We've been very passive. I think it is trending in the right direction, but I also think, and hopefully one day you have Yarimar on from Centro, but she is a sociologist and she's currently studying. We had a great conversation about this. She's currently studying what are the driving forces for people that want to either stay a territory or become a state. And it's all fear-based. Yeah. And I think that what we need to be thinking about, and I hope that, I don't know, I really want to find the Boricua economists that can calculate what reparations the island would be owed for all of the years of tariffs and taxes and land usage, because the pathway, I think, to an independent Puerto Rico is not just a break. It's how is there fiscal stability that's owed? Like there's a debt that is owed. And I think that has to become part of the conversation. And I don't think that we can talk about atrocities that have happened without looking at the economic hobbling. And I mean, just the hobbling there would be no modern feminist movement without Puerto Rican women, because birth control was tested on Puerto Rican women. Yep. And so quite literally, there is so much debt owed to the people of the island that I think it needs to go, the conversations need to not just be, should this happen, but it should happen. And how is it? And what is the debt that is owed? Because I don't think it's without, and I think that the economic insecurity, what Yarima told me, she's like, it's fear of the unrest and the lack of security. And I think, and that is actually on the one hand, it's a legitimate fear. If you look at the history of Jamaica and when their early years of independence, just as a contemporary, what's in a slightly analogous situation, there was years and years of gang violence and lack of infrastructure and now it's you go 10 years ago for today, if you spend the time in Jamaica, you're seeing the changes. There's still corruption and blah, blah, blah. But I think that's government, right? But you see, it did take a little bit of time and yet it is possible. And so I think, and that is without what I feel, I think that there's an economic debt owed for the exploitation, the loss of life, the actual crippling of society, of a culture. So I don't know. I think that the conversation almost needs to be expanded to what is owed, because this one-way street is just not It can't. I don't think people are going to stand for it any much longer. Really.
No, totally. Yeah, I think with things like the internet, connecting people, there's some people I don't think probably should be connected through the internet, but it's connected a lot of people in a way that's allowed us to share knowledge, debate. Not always do those debates happen in good faith or with all the proper facts, but I think it allows us to almost have an a la carte in a good way of educating ourselves. Like if someone is motivated enough to take the deep dive on a topic, they could do that. Where I think in the past, our Puerto Rican ancestors, you're kind of at the behest of what the U.S. media tells you, what a corporate-owned media
that's
owns,
right.
That narrative on the island, politicians that may be in the pocket of people with financial interests here in the U.S. The list goes on and on and on.
It goes on and on and on.
And we have more examples now. We're talking about things like the massacre in Oklahoma in the early 1900s.
Yep.
We look at something like our brothers, sisters, friends in Haiti, and how, that slave revolution became the first independent nation of Black people, of Africans, that ended up turning into a concerted effort by the world to essentially isolate them to the point where they could not be set up for success or recognized as their own country. If and to use a recent example, if Barbados can get independence from the British, I don't know why Puerto Rico can't. So to lean into this fear narrative, I think you're absolutely right. I think that's a very scary part for people. Now, I'm not saying Puerto Rico's independence is the only pathway forward. I'm just saying, let's take fear out of the discussion and talk about what this looks like in practicality. We lean into emotion and we lean into the heart as opposed to leading with our head. And I think that's where we get into these really bad debates over Puerto Rico status without really putting everything on the table in good faith. So anyway, that was my TED Talk.
I think, no. And I think I would also just say some of it is you can't, it's sort of the same thing that we were talking about family shame and secrets. It's like, if we don't call a thing, we can't correct it. And I think that for too long, we've allowed America and Americans to go around thinking that they don't have a colony. And I think that we have to scream it from the rooftops. And the idea, and I think I see it as no matter what the resolution is, what I know can exist. How can we talk about social justice and voting rights and not have Puerto Rico be part of that conversation?
Right.
Like we can't, we should be talking about, when we talk about instating voting rights to, formerly incarcerated individuals in the United States, how do we have that conversation? But we have to also have this other conversation, because I think this idea that there's conditional versions of citizenship is the fundamental flaw. It's the equal crime of all of these problems. And I think that one of the things that I'm hoping is that this book sparks some conversation about the fact that we are people that have a colony, and, that we have people that do not have equal rights, that are theoretically citizens, the same as the rest of us, but not. So I think that is something that I hope, I do think, one of the reasons why I do hope and why I wanted to do the adaptation was because I do think that art can, I think, yes, people are talking about Oklahoma, that they're definitely talking about it more because of the success of the HBO adaptation for Watchmen.
Yeah.
Like that put that much more in the public consciousness. Like it got, like suddenly, like there were stories about it in the Washington Post, in the New York Times, like, like it in the LA Times, like it was like this forgotten bit of history that pop culture put back. And so for me, the goal of adapting the book for television was less about, creating a career for myself in film and television than it was about like the opportunity that this has. And that was what the people at HULU thought as well. And they, and they said very clearly, and that was why that was such a great partnership. They're like, we want to do for the injustices of Puerto Rico what The Handmaid's Tale has done for women's reproductive rights, in terms of putting that in the center of conversation. So they are very committed to the politics of this book. And I've been very proud to be partnering with them for that reason.
Hola, Joshua Smyser-DeLeon here, founder and host of the Paseo podcast. Thanks for listening to the show. where we highlight stories by, from, and about the Puerto Rican community, from La Isla to the diaspora. If you want to help us share the diverse and vibrant stories that make up the Puerto Rican communities here on Paseo, Boricua, and Chicago and around the world, subscribe to our podcast on Apple Podcasts or wherever you stream your podcasts. Subscribing helps more people find the show and will help you make sure you never miss an episode. Leaving a 5-star rating and showing some love in the comments helps too. You can also give a donation by looking up the Paseo podcast on savechicagomedia.org. Okay, that's enough from me. Enjoy the show. Are you allowed to say who? I know one person, at least one actor, has been tied to it already, and that's been made public. But can you say a little bit of who the cast is going to be?
Yeah. So if people have read the book, then it'll mean more. Aubrey Plaza is Olga. This is actually
Love that
other
casting.
than when she was in Parks and Rec. This is like the first time she'll be playing a Latina in a big way. And it's a very and she's fucking amazing in this part. Oh my God, she's amazing. Ramon Rodriguez, who a lot of people might know from The Wire and The Affair, he's playing Prieto. And he is in real life just such a tireless advocate for Puerto Rico, for Maria, sort of like reparations of sorts for Maria. Like he's amazing. He's just amazing. And then, Wanda de Jesus is playing Blanca, the mom. Laz Alonso is playing Reggie King. Jesse. I can't believe that I didn't not lead with this, but Mateo is Jesse Williams, who is just fantastic and so fun and awesome in that part. And of course, how could I stop without Jessica Pimentel is playing Mabel, who is like one of the best characters like I can think of, like, and just it's been such a fun, and that's been a joy because we've become friends. We're both from Brooklyn. We're both from South Brooklyn. Like, it's just like, we like are at the same age. And it was like, we just had this experience sort of put us finally in the same space. And it's just been beautiful. And, and Melissa Dupuis plays Sarita, and which is a tiny part in the book, but it's a great part in the show. And, it's been a beautiful thing. Like, it's honestly, it's a majority Latinx cast. It's Daphne Rubin Vega plays Tia Lola. Which is fun. So fun. She's so amazing. I mean, we had this beautiful scene that isn't in the book, but that we shot for the pilot. And it was like Aubrey and Jessica and Melissa and Daphne and then these two wonderful extras that, came in for the day. And I was in the room because we were running like little lines and things. And we all afterwards like started crying. Like, we were out in the street and on a street in Sunset Park doing little shots because nobody had been other than, Jessica was like, I've been in spaces with this many other Latinas, but not only when I was playing a prisoner on Orange is the New Black. And no one else had really, like, it was such a rarity as actresses that they got, and that there was such diversity of what was, of beauty that was being shown in the space, in the room. And so, it was very emotional. And the idea, and it's a lot like the book. I wrote it without explanation. Toni Morrison talks about getting the white man off your shoulder, like, and who's not writing for the white gaze, and I did not write for the white gaze at all, and I didn't write the show for that gaze either. And I think there's a lot, the challenge when you try to stay that way is like, there's like, you have these issues where it's like people are like, well, I don't understand, and why are they speaking so much Spanish? And I think you have to, so like there's always a little bit of that, but then I think that the authenticity, people also then are like, oh, I'm in this world and I really I'm loving it here. And so, it was very important to me to paint South Brooklyn and New York as they are. And it's been pretty beautiful. So I'm very proud of the pilot. Alfonso Gomez de Rejon, who directed me and Earl and the Dying Girl, and that a lot of people probably know from American Horror Story. He directed the pilot and co-executive produced it with me, and I wrote the pilot, and it was just an amazing experience. And working with this cast was so beautiful. So I'm hoping that we just get to keep going and going. And I think it will be a beautiful thing for people to see. Oh, and it was so fun. I mean, like, it's like, I'm sure in Chicago you have your like weird local celebrities, but we had like Ebro in the Morning has like a part,
Oh,
and like
yeah, nice. That's
there's a
great.
whole big thing with Ebro and everybody from Ebro in the Morning, and Errol Lewis, who's like our like local Walter Cronkite, is like in it, and like it was a lot of fun. To your point
Um,
about people about what does a Puerto Rican look like? Like
yeah.
there's this awesome scene, and the way that we cut it. This I don't even know that I'm supposed to talk about, but I'm going to say it anyway. But there's this great scene where Reggie King comes onto Hot 97 and Prieto is on. He's like a guest, and he starts talking about Puerto Rico, and Rosenberg says, "I forget you're Puerto Rican," and Reggie King goes, "What's that supposed to mean?" Oh, no, he's like, "What's
Yeah.
that supposed to mean?" And then we immediately hard cut to Aubrey, because as soon as the casting announcement was done, people were like, shouldn't they have cast a Puerto Rican in that part? And like her fans are like so rabid, and they're like, she's fucking Puerto Rican, shut up. Like, so it's like, but it's like this idea of like, he doesn't see Puerto Rican to people. She doesn't see Puerto Rican. Like, what is it? What is it? Like, what is it supposed to look like? And it was just this awesome moment that me and the editor and Alfonso had, where we were like, that's really good. Like, that was just really like, that said the whole story in that one cut, like, and it was just so great.
I think that's a perfect segue to my next question. And you definitely touched on this as well and throughout our conversation, but Jasmine Camacho Quinn brings Puerto Rico our second ever gold medal. And she did not have to represent Puerto Rico. She could have easily represented the United States and brought a gold medal to the US. Now, after she won, I saw a lot of chatter of people questioning her Boricua card. She doesn't speak Spanish. She wasn't born on the island. Of course, there's that undertone of racism because she's Afro-Boricua, so she doesn't quote unquote look Puerto Rican. So based off of your experiences, Xochitl, what does being Puerto Rican mean to you?
That's a great, beautiful way to frame that question. Actually, I love that. I think growing up, I didn't necessarily feel Puerto Rican enough, and I think some of it was this, like, I felt like a bad Puerto Rican. Like, I felt like my Spanish wasn't great. I felt like I can't seem to allow myself to be led on the dance floor, which is a flaw of mine. But like, although I do have great rhythm, I just felt, I don't know, I felt like I wasn't checking enough of the boxes, and it wasn't that I ever didn't claim it as an identity. I just felt like I was like, I'm not very good at it. Like, it's like, and so I think I started out being like, but what I am really good at is writing, and I'm very proud of this. And so I want to write about this aspect of my identity, and I want to write about this culture that I love so much. And so now, in the process of writing it, some of this changed, because what I see the things that I am the most proud of myself, which is like strength and an ability to, and love, and this care that I have for other people other than myself, this feeling of being in a community. And I very much see that as my Puerto Ricanness. Like, I feel that is, and my ability to, when I talk about resilience, like, it's not just to keep going, it's to keep going and also celebrate life. Like, it's like to knock off, like dust off, and be like, I'm still going to celebrate life. And I don't think that I realized that was part of my inheritance and what I feel it is about. And I think to not just take things, I actually think like this sense of like, no, and like that's not going to be okay. And this ability to stand up for myself. All of these things that I think are my personal attributes, I actually feel are my cultural attributes. And I am so for me, this idea of being a joyful but resilient person, it's not that I haven't had very difficult periods of life. It's that I don't feel defined by I feel, for me, being Puerto Rican is being defined by your strength and not by your trials. And that feels very valid to me. And I felt so much more so. I'm like going to get emotional. Like, when I got to the end of the book, like, and I was just like, this is literally who I am. Like the perseverance of, the book ends on the island, and I won't give anything away, but, I talked to one editor who was from the island, who moved here and lived in Sunset Park, who was like, she's like, I'm not going to win this auction, but I needed to talk to you. And she's like, when I got to the end, and she started singing Preciosa to me on the phone, and we were both like crying. And I just think to me, it is about being strong and about finding joy in life, no matter how many things are thrown at you that tell you otherwise. And that for me is what it means.
Well said. And what a blessing it is to be able to have the platform you have to write a novel like this that people are enjoying, and to infuse your own identity, your own experiences into a character. I mean, that's a big deal.
Thank you. And I also want to say, like, because of all the other things that we talked about, and gentrification and classism and all these other things, and this is one of the questions you had emailed about, and I do just want to touch on it very quickly.
Please.
Because of all those things, I didn't think, and I think unfortunately too many people in our community I didn't see on the table being a writer or an artist. I was like, I need to survive. Like I have this debt from college. I have to find a job. I need insurance. Like nobody in my family can help me. Like it's like you're independent and you're thrown out there. And I want to just say that it took me almost a full generation. Like it's like as though I had raised my own self into like having some financial independence and stability, and to having social capital, like my own connections and networks, to be able to have the courage to say, like, I can be an artist now and take this leap and do that. And so that is not to say like it should take everybody 20 years. It's just, I hope this is on the radar of every young person that's like considering what they might want to go out and do. But like the idea is also to say that it's also never too late to then make that adjustment. And that if you have something to say, to find the route to get to say it. And we need more storytellers. We need more artists. We need more screenwriters. We need more directors. We need more, and we need to help one another to pull each other up. But that is what we're really good at. Like as a community, we are so good at when you look at what happened with Maria, like everybody was there for each other. You know what I mean? Like it was like that. It wasn't FEMA. It was it was not. It was not FEMA. It was like it was to me that was like the spirit that we have. So we need to just I say this to say I came to this career later in life. I am humbled and overwhelmed by the response that people have had to this book. Vogue just put it on its most anticipated list. Parade magazine had it on its most anticipated list. If you mentioned Time, but like that, this is so powerful to me. But it is only through that lived experience that I had that I was able to get here. And so sometimes our roads are just a little longer, and that's okay.
Oh, I love that. And I was going to ask you what's the best piece of advice you've been given, but you just gave a really great piece of advice. So, I mean, I think that's perfect. I mean, if you have something, write it. I mean, that's a big reason why I started this podcast. I mean, I didn't see enough of our stories being highlighted in traditional media. So I said, well, let's create a space where we get a different Boricua in the guest chair and we just talk about whatever.
Yeah,
I mean, it doesn't even have to directly be about Puerto Rican culture. Just the fact that they're Puerto Rican shows the dynamic nature of our people. So let's create that space. And I think you've created some good space with Olga Dies Dreaming. I really do. And like I said at the beginning of our conversation, I haven't finished it. I'm keeping myself honest.
That's okay. I can't wait. I can't wait for you to finish it.
I'm digging it.
You have to message me when you're done.
I will. If there's any twists and turns, I'm going to be like, Xochitl, how could you? Really appreciate you giving us the time. I do want you to give our listeners ways that they can learn more about the book, pick up the book, stay up to date with you, give us all the things. How can people stay up with you, the book, after they listen to this episode?
You can find me on social media at Xochitl the G, and it's Xochitl the G. And I'm on Instagram and Twitter. And then my website, XochitlGonzalez.com, actually has links to a couple of excerpts and some other writing that I've done. But I also have a weekly column for The Atlantic for subscribers called Brooklyn Everywhere, where I mainly talk about gentrification. Actually, this week I wrote about Jeremy Strong, which is so anyway. I
check
think
that out.
It varies from talking about my bra lady to Jeremy Strong, so it's really a broad spectrum. But yeah, so I think you can kind of get a taste of things everywhere. And if you haven't ordered a copy of Olga from your local indie, now's a great time. And hopefully I'll be coming up to Chicago once things kind of calm down a little bit.
I will have a café con leche and avena de coco from Nelly's local restaurant on Paseo
Yes.
Boricua waiting for you when that day comes.
Beautiful. Thank you so much.
Xochitl Gonzalez, author, executive producer, fair to say,
Yeah.
right? Yes.
Yes.
And of course, like we said, author of Olga Dies Dreaming. It's coming out January 4th. By the time you listen to this, it will be available in your bookstore, your local bookstore. So go check it out, pick it up. I think you'll like what you read. Xochitl, thank you again for being on the Paseo podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.